20 of the war with Iran. And here's where things stand. A series of retaliatory strikes by Iran on oil and gas facilities across the Middle East is adding fuel to the fire that is the worst oil supply crisis in history. It is so bad, in fact, that Donald Trump's own Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, says they're considering lifting sanctions on oil from Iran. That is, of course, the country that we are at war with. Here at home, Donald Trump's top national security officials left us all with more questions than answers in a series of briefings. Speaking before the House Intel Committee, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard repeated a line she first trotted out yesterday to much criticism, that a, quote, imminent threat to our country is whatever Donald Trump says it is. Take a listen to this line of questioning and answering by Congressman Jason Crow.
Did you or the IC make any assessments as to the timing of potential threats facing the United States from Iran in the last 90 days?
I'm sure there was timelines factored into the intelligence assessments that were delivered.
Did any of them show imminence?
The imminent nature of a threat is determined by the president based on a totality of the intelligence and information provided to him.
Okay. Her former deputy, Joe Kent, didn't agree and didn't leave it to Donald Trump to tell us what the meaning of imminent is. Here he is in no uncertain terms saying that there was, in fact, no imminent threat posed by Iran.
The argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us immediately, that just simply did not exist. There was no intelligence that said, hey, on whatever day it was, March 1st, the Iranians are going to launch this big sneak attack. They're going to do some kind of a 9/11 Pearl Harbor, et cetera. They're going to attack one of our bases. There was none of that intelligence.
Tulsi Gabbard also said that the goals of Israel, our ally and our ally in this war, are not aligned with the goals of the United States of America.
The objectives that have been laid out by the president are different from the objectives that have been laid out by the Israeli government.
And how do they differ?
We can see through the operations that the Israeli government has been focused on disabling the Iranian leadership and taking out several members, obviously beginning with the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. And they continue to focus on that effort.
How does that differ from our goals?
The president has stated that his objectives are to destroy Iran's ballistic missile launching capability, their ballistic missile production capability, and their Navy, the IRGC Navy.
Those comments are particularly significant today in the wake of an attack by Israel on an Iranian gas field, which led to scenes like this all across the Middle East. A wave of attacks on oil and gas installations in Qatar led to fears that the energy crisis will only deepen. New York Times explains it like this, quote, while an end to the conflict would reopen the shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz, serious damage to oil infrastructure would be longer lasting. That outcome is what economists fear most as they try and forecast the potential impact on the global economy. As crude rises, so does gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, and eventually those increases pass through to the prices of everyday goods. The attacks by Iran have sent Donald Trump scrambling. In a Truth Social post today, he announced that Israel will no longer target Iran's natural gas facilities and said that the Trump administration did not know about those strikes in advance. However, 3 Israeli officials tell the New York Times that Israel's strike on Iran's gas field was coordinated with the Trump administration. And Trump himself seems to suggest that he knew about the strike in comments in the Oval Office today. Watch those.
You talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields.
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent, but get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
What? Yeah, I knew. We're independent, but sometimes he does what he does. We'll let you decide what those words mean. The direction of this war spiraling out of Donald Trump's control is abundantly clear, but it's happening at the same time that the questions are multiplying about the rationale for the war to begin with. It is where we start today with House Intelligence Committee's ranking member, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, thank you for being here.
Good to be with you, Nicole.
Do you know the answer to, do you know what did they or did they not know about the strikes on oil and gas fields?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not privy in the day-to-day communications that the Oval Office has with the Israeli government, so I don't know. Look, it should surprise nobody that from time to time the interests of Israel and of the United States will diverge. Generally they don't, but sometimes they do. And the Israeli Prime Minister, I know him relatively well, have visited him on a number of occasions. He's got his head about what he thinks should and will happen here, and I'm sure he listens to the President of the United States. But it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to do everything that the President of the United States tells him to do.
Congressman, let me see if you can help us understand your current understanding of why we are at war with Iran.
Yeah, look, let's start with the facts here. There was no imminent threat from Iran, full stop. I've reviewed thousands of intelligence reports and talked to lots of people. There was no imminent threat. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't deny that. Tulsi Gabbard has developed this construction that I think is in the service of keeping her job, because she can't contradict the president or you don't keep your job in that administration. But there was no imminent threat. And there was certainly no near-term nuclear threat. And you don't need to take my word for it. 9 months ago, Donald Trump was saying that the nuclear infrastructure was obliterated. I don't know if that was precisely true or not, but there was no near-term threat. So that leaves the question, why did the president decide to launch this strike, particularly given the fact that our intelligence community and presumably people like Marco Rubio would have said there's some chance that the Strait of Hormuz is getting closed and, gasoline prices will go up by $1. That I can't tell you, other than I think that, Donald Trump in that moment, this is not a deep, long-term, multi-dimensional strategic thinker. In that moment, he thought it was his moment, I guess, to secure a place in history by finally doing whatever his version is of wiping Iran off the map. I give you that because that sort of seems to be the through line of his explanation for why we're at war in the Middle East again.
So no imminent threat, and it is not the testimony of Tulsi Gabbard today or yesterday that there was. But you're coming to another rationale that is out there, and that's regime change. It seems that it was known ahead of time that the regime could turn to someone more hardline and anti-American than the Ayatollah, which, based on reporting in the Wall Street Journal, sounds like exactly what it has done. What is your sense of whether regime change is or was or could be the goal?
It's not the goal. And in fact, I think you played a clip there in which that was one of the examples of where our objectives differ from the Israelis. But I've heard multiple senior Trump administration officials say that is not our goal, which, by the way, on the one hand makes you feel good, right? To actually change the regime, you would need a massive amount of military assets on the ground. You can't change, you very rarely can change a regime from the air. And so I'm not looking for ways for us to get more involved here. But on the other hand, and this is the classic definition of a dilemma, on the other hand, if the same regime is in place, look, they can keep the Strait of Hormuz closed with, 3 guys in a motorboat and a couple of mines, right? They don't need aircraft carriers or destroyers or, F-35s to close that strait. They can keep it closed. And if you have the same regime run by a more extreme supreme leader than we had before, whose, by the way, mother and daughter and wife were apparently all killed in military strikes, if that regime is still in place, what do you think they're going to do? Are they going to enter into good faith negotiations because Donald Trump declares victory and it's time to leave? Hard to imagine.
What is your understanding of their current internal discussions about whether or not they will send troops into Iran, boots on the ground?
Yeah, I can't give you an answer to that question. What I can tell you is what they're telling the Congress. And what they're doing is they are leaving the door open to troops on the ground, which if you've watched any of these conflicts, or if you go far, if you go back to Vietnam, where we started out with a very, very limited military mission, or look at any number of other conflicts, this is the way you get something called mission creep, right? So this war was sold. It was sold to the American public, in as much as it was sold as a very brief thing. We'd be in and out. And now all of a sudden they're keeping the door open to troops on the ground. No congressional approval, no congressional deliberation, and, no real backing either by our allies or by the majority of the American people. That is a very perilous place from which to be expanding an already difficult war.
And let me I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but the troops may be put on the ground to do what? If the goal is not to change the brutal, heinous regime and not to deal with any imminent threat, because there wasn't one. What do they say the troops are being kept on the table to do?
Well, again, they're not being that specific with us. And oh, by the way, you're welcome to give me a hard time. Everybody else does. But here's why they would do it. They would do it for some set of missions that would involve maybe trying to secure the land from which you can fire very rudimentary missiles into tankers trying to get through the Strait of Hormuz. There is talk about maybe a special operations raid to get the uranium out of there. By the way, that's completely bananas, right? I mean, the idea that we could put troops into 3 or 4 different locations in a hostile country to dig out a bunch of uranium that is whatever it is, 300 meters underground, is crazy. But you can see the temptations, because right now military people are telling the president we can't open up the Strait of Hormuz. To do that, we would need to control that strait, and to do that, we would need to control the land next to the strait. So that's why they're not foreclosing that option.